So
Yeah.
before I let you go, can I ask you two unrelated to Orwell questions? There's two things I've always been curious about. One is about reading. And you mentioned your own reading in Figures in a Landscape. You said rather than read a book, I read a writer, or I read a writer, devouring all the novels and stories, and then whatever biography I could find. Now, I did this as well, especially early on. Whenever I found a writer who really floored me, I'd read all the books by this writer, biographies, collected letters, and then finally critical works about them. I did that with Henry Miller, Lawrence Durrell, with your work. Who were the writers that you read in that way, or who were the ones that were most important to your development?
It's a very good question. I'm glad you brought that up because it's an abiding interest of mine. And I once went to a university and they said, "We're reading a book, The Mosquito Coast. Can you discuss it?" And I said, "What other books have you read?" This is a seminar at the University of Cincinnati. And they said, "Well, nothing." I said, "Apart from Mosquito Coast." They said, "That's it." I said, "No, no, you should read some other stuff that I've written." I mean, I was inspired to write the book by taking a trip to Costa Rica and to South America and blah, blah, blah. And I remember the head of the department saying to me, "We don't have as much time to read as you civilians." And I thought, you son of a bitch, you ignorant son
Jesus.
of a bitch. What an insulting thing to say. First, you civilians, I don't, he has a job, he has a salary, I don't. The only way to know a book, to know a writer, is to read it all. You read it all, the good books. And do you know something? Bad books are more revealing of a writer's character than the good books. That's why Burmese Days is such an interesting book, because it shows a lot about who Blair Orwell was. So you asked a very, very good question, which I can't remember anyone ever asking me this. To answer it, I would say Rebecca West, more
Mhm,
recently. So she wrote one of the great travel books, Black Lamb and Gray Falcon.
mhm.
Tremendous essayist called um, the meaning of treason and the new meaning of treason. Her novels, The Birds Fall Down. Then there's a wonderful biography of Rebecca West. Rebecca West was the lover of H.G. Wells. And there's a bit of Orwell connected with Rebecca West too. So I read everything by Rebecca West, but the other writers, Joseph Conrad, Fitzgerald, Henry Miller, did that. Kerouac, um, more recently, George Simenon, quite a challenge. He wrote hundreds of novels. I haven't read them all, but I think I've read, and I wrote introductions to a couple of Simenon's novels, one called The Widow. I've read maybe 75 or 80, the very short Simenon novels, Meg Ray, and then regular novels. And there are three biographies of him. The best one is by a Frenchman called Pierre Assouline. But Patrick Monham's biography is very good. The ones that affected me. So I'm very interested in what was, why did this person write the book? How did he write the book? When he was my age. So when I turned 50, I thought Orwell once said, "At 50, every man has the face he deserves." So I thought he never made it to 50, by the way. But so Orwell, all the books, all the biographies, the ones that affected me most, it's hard to say, but I would suppose Somerset Maugham.
Hmm.
Um, he lived he lived into his 93, I think, um, when he died. That affected me a lot. Orwell affected me a lot. Actually, one very good example is V.S. Naipaul. So V.S.
Mhm.
Naipaul, I read everything he'd written. I knew him. So, but I could never have written his biography. The biography by Patrick French is brilliant, and I'm in it. I have a minor part in it, but it's a book that is delves very deeply into Naipaul's life. I can't think of one that affected me. I suppose to a certain extent, very surprising since you read Henry Miller. Isn't it interesting that Henry Miller, after Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, where he's seen a kind of rambunctious and, I don't care, I don't give a shit, and I'm drunk and I'm in Paris and he goes in a kind of spiritual journey to Big Sur, where
Mhm.
he's writing about Hinduism, Buddhism, the spiritual life, um, and then reminiscences and so forth. And it has a couple of unhappy marriages, and and women are taking taking advantage of him. Then he moves to Los Angeles. You think of Henry Miller in a split level house in Los Angeles playing ping pong, which is so that's a surprising one as a trajectory of, I don't know how old he was when he died, probably in his mid to late 80s when he
Mm.
died.
Yeah.
But the end of his life is in Los Angeles, sunny, salubrious Los Angeles. Henry
Mm.
Miller, the guy from Quiet Days in Clichy and Tropic of Cancer, suddenly transformed. That's amazing. Well, then
Mm.
there's Kerouac. Well, Kerouac, where did he end up?
Yeah,
St.
Orlando.
Petersburg, Florida. Yeah,
Mm.
well, Orlando, where okay, Florida. Drunk, right wing,
Mm.
and not the same person. He's not on the road and he's not hitchhiking.
Mm.
So it's all a revelation.
Mm.
And so that's a great thing. As far as it, big influence, I read them all the time. I mean, more recent, I read all the books and the biography of Muriel Spark,
Ah.
who had lived in Africa for a while too. She and has written a little bit about that. Doris Lessing, I read her autobiography, 2 volume of autobiography, which is really great. Walking in the Shade is one. I can't think of the other one. Walking in the Shade, and can't think of the other one. Very good autobiography. Numerous books, including science fiction. There's a biography of her by Patrick French coming out next year.
Mm.
And I knew Patrick French, and I put Patrick French in touch with the lover of the Golden Notebook, a wonderful guy called um, Clancy Siegel. Clancy Siegel I knew in London, then he moved to Los Angeles, but he was Doris's lover. And so Patrick talked to him in LA, and then Clancy died. So it was
Mm.
great. Unfortunately, Patrick also died, but I think the book is done. So anyway, as a project, because I didn't go to graduate school, I've never done postgraduate work. The way to know a book or a writer, read all the books, if they're good books, even if they're bad, they might be mixed in, like Faulkner's or Fitzgerald's for that matter, and then read the biography, and then you know the person. And if you want to be a writer, that's the way to read. You don't read one book. You don't read As I Lay Dying and then say, oh, I want to write. You read everything, and you
Mm.
realize that a writer often writes bad books. He writes boring books. He writes books that are maybe he shouldn't have written, but that's the way to another book. And that's the writing life, which is the opus of it. Flaubert is a good example of that. I mean, Madame Bovary is brilliant. Bouvard and Pécuchet is not a great book. I mean, it's a weird book. Salambo, great
Mhm.
book. Um, so, you could say, I don't like to be quoted saying Flaubert is uneven, but Flaubert is uneven, and the biography is wonderful. He died in his 50s, but brilliant, wonderful. So as that, anyone listening to this, you want to become a writer, you want to be a real reader, do that.
Mm.
Read all the books, all the poems, all the books, then read the autobiography, and then read the biography. And then you could say, I know that writer. And that becomes a period in your life too, when you're reading, when you're completely immersed in
Mm.
that writer. Wonderful
Yeah.
experience, actually.
The other question.